I can still feel the weight of his words. Dad stood in my living room like a judge on a throne. At 35, I'd built a career in cybersecurity and led a team for a Silicon Valley firm. He's Robert Hayes, 64, an old-school accountant who spent 40 years at the same firm. His creed was simple: no complaints, no rest, no weakness. He spat on the gift I'd bought him, a handcrafted Montague watch. It cost $12,000, a tribute to everything he'd taught me about discipline and precision. Yet he called it a bribe, labeled me worthless for chasing code instead of crunching spreadsheets. He summed it up in 2 words: pathetic waste. I'd always been the rebel in our family. After college, I walked away from ledger books to join a startup in Seattle. By 27, I was making more in a week than he earned in a month. He hated it. Every time I visited, his pride twisted into envy. Over dinner with his coworkers, he'd whisper, "Kid sits at a screen all day, think that's real work." Meanwhile, my younger sister, Lauren, 31, followed his blueprint to the letter. She's a registered nurse in Portland, quiet, obedient. He celebrated her like a trophy. She calls him every Sunday. She follows his rules. Behind her back, I paid off her student loans. I never told either of them. He would have turned her success into a story of charity and my success into showboating. Last Valentine's Day, I finally lost count of our mortgage payments. 3 years earlier, they'd hit a rough patch, and I'd set up an auto transfer for $2 and $200 each month. I kept every statement. To me, it was more than money. It was leverage. It was proof that I could lift their world and proof that it still wasn't enough. That morning, after Dad's latest insult, I realized I'd reached my limit. His contempt was a weight I refused to carry any longer. I needed a test, a moment to tip the balance. Little did he know I'd been planning my move for months. Next, you'll see how I pushed the first button. I woke up at 5:07 a.m., the same time I always did. But that morning, the air tasted different, charged electric, as if the world knew something had shifted. I poured black coffee into my chipped travel mug, its bitter warmth a relief against my pounding heart. Behind me, the Montague watch gleamed in its drawer, its polished face a silent witness to every unspoken argument and simmering resentment. I opened the bank's portal, an archaic interface as stubborn as my father, and stared at the autopay schedule: $2, $200, transferring like clockwork each month. For 3 years, I'd funded their mortgage, logging every transfer in a personal spreadsheet. Today, that ended. My finger hovered over the cancel autopay button. I pictured Dad lecturing me about sacrifice and suffering, picturing his smug nod whenever a failing tech stock flashed on his screen. He claimed money couldn't buy respect, but maybe it bought leverage. I clicked through confirmation dialogues, removed myself as an authorized signer, and watched cancellation successful flicker on the screen. My heart thundered in my chest, and I knew there was no turning back. The coffee went cold, forgotten. Outside, squirrels darted through the yard, oblivious to human debts and family feuds. For them, life was simple. For me, everything I'd built was now a weapon. The watch caught a sliver of dawn through the window, time itself mocking me. In canceling those payments, I'd lit a fuse under the house I helped keep standing, and I was ready to watch the pieces fall. Within hours, the repercussions unfurled like a dark ribbon across my digital life: 7 frantic texts from Mom, 1 pleading email from Lauren, and a voicemail from Dad delivered in that same calm, measured tone Uncle Don called the bank. Mortgage payments aren't going through. Is this a mistake? My stomach clenched, but guilt didn't swallow me. Instead, a fierce clarity seized me. For years, I'd masked resentment behind spreadsheets. Now they scrambled without me. I pictured their beige-sided house gutters rusting with neglect, my payments the only thing keeping it from foreclosure. I downloaded the PDF from First Horizon Bank. There it was in bold red letters, a 30-day foreclosure notice. My pulse raced at the irony. The son they called worthless was now the one pulling the rug from under them. Outside, life carried on: commuters, baristas, strangers who didn't care about our drama, underscoring how small and absurd our conflict was in the grand scheme. And yet this notice consumed me, a testament to the power I finally wielded. I closed my eyes, imagining Dad's face when he read it, silent contempt distilled into pure shock. And in that shock lay my redemption. But even then, I didn't know the worst was yet to come. It arrived that night in the form of 3 knocks at midnight. My doorbell camera alerted me, but when I peered through the peephole, all I saw was a bulky silhouette under the porch light. Heart hammering, I crept downstairs, flicked on the light, and swung the door open. A man stood there, dark jacket hands shoved into pockets, staring up at me as if expecting me to fall in line. "Tell your dad Vincent sent his regards," he said without menace in his voice, just enough to freeze me. I recognized him from the barbecue, Vincent Kruger, Dad's silent work friend turned enforcer. He dropped 2 blank business cards on my welcome mat and melted back into the night. I locked the door phone clutched in my sweaty hand, replaying his last words. Inside, the walls felt suddenly closer, the house colder. I rewatched the footage, no badge, no credentials, only that ominous gate. Fear would have been normal. Instead, I felt defiance. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd meet them head on. I texted Lauren, "He's here." Her reply was instant, "Call me." As I stared at those blank cards, I realized I'd forced them to reveal their true faces, and I wondered how far they'd push before the stakes turned deadly. At 8 a.m., I met Lauren in a quiet corner of her favorite Portland coffee shop. She wore nurse's scrubs tucked into sneakers, hair pulled back like a soldier ready for war. She slid a twine-bound folder across the table. Inside were invoices, forged checks, emails, evidence of every illicit transfer from Grandpa's trust into our parents' accounts. My pulse spiked. For years, I'd believed I was the only one funding their life. Now I saw Lauren's inheritance had been stolen too. Rage and betrayal flooded through me. We had a choice: let them drift on our goodwill or expose them entirely. Outside the cafe's morning bustle went on coffee machines, hissing nurses arriving for rounds, strangers scrolling through their phones unaware of our private crusade. We mapped our course: compile every document, hire counsel, freeze assets, and make them answer for every dollar taken. Each step risked escalation, legal battles, or worse, but this alliance was our only shield. We left the cafe hand in hand, burdened yet resolute. What came next would demand everything we had. Back home, I met with Vance, the financial crimes attorney I'd once consulted for a corporate breach. His mahogany-scented office felt like a war room. I laid out our evidence: foreclosure notices, trust siphoning records, Vincent's midnight visit. He steepled his fingers. "We'll file for an asset freeze, breach of fiduciary claims, misappropriation of trust funds. We need affidavits from both of you." His assistant slid a 47-page draft complaint across the desk, each count tied to an exhibit. For symbolism, he insisted we highlight how the Montague watch, a gift of gratitude, became an emblem of betrayal and power. Narrative, he said, sways judges as much as dry facts. We signed powers of attorney granting Vance full authority, and outside the window the sky darkened to bruised gray as if the heavens braced for impact. That afternoon an email pinged, "Asset freeze approved." A surge of triumph and dread washed over me. The battle was fully engaged now, and I knew victory might cost us more than we'd imagined. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the glow of streetlights painting angular shadows on the walls. The Montague watch lay on the coffee table, its face unreadable, a reminder that time can be both gift and weapon. I realized I'd shed the skin my parents forced me into obedient son in their ledger-driven world, and now stood as the architect of my own fate, forged by conflict. My phone buzzed a text from Lauren, their accountant called. They're panicking. Of all people, he'd managed their fake charitable deductions and shady write-offs. Now he flipped sides to save his own skin. I tapped back, prepare for another front. Symbols of our old life, the watch, the house, the trust that never existed, had twisted into tokens of deceit. Yet beneath the cynicism, conviction bloomed like tender spring grass through concrete. This had to end on my terms. I locked eyes with the watch's reflection and whispered, "Showtime." And then a new alert lit up my screen, another silent image, another message, waiting to be unmasked. I saw the new alert just after midnight, an email with no subject, no sender name, only a single PDF attachment labeled "Showtime." My pulse quickened as I downloaded it, hundreds of pages of bank statements I hadn't yet uncovered, spanning a decade of secret shell companies slipping money out of our grandfather's estate. My first thought raced to Lauren. She was asleep halfway across the country, dreaming of quiet hospital corridors. Not this. But this was our reality. Now we weren't children under Dad's thumb anymore. We were hunters tracking a hidden poison. My hands shook as I realized how deep the rot went, how every handshake, every whispered promise in his tidy world had masked a lie. The Montague watch on my bedside table ticked its steady proclamation of wasted time. I closed my eyes, picturing Dad in his ironed shirt and clipped tie, blind to the empire built on our betrayal. In that moment, I felt a surge, equal parts rage and adrenaline, knowing I needed to strike before they could cover their tracks again. At 2:15 a.m., I texted Lauren, "Meet me tomorrow at 9. Bring any backups." My heart thudded as I hit send. There was no turning back. I called Vance at an ungodly hour, his groggy hello peppered with concern when I told him about the new files. He promised to read the documents first thing and prep a supplemental motion. Hanging up, I stared at the watch's reflection, the hands frozen at a time. I'd never forget the moment my parents thought they outsmarted me. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my laptop, and began encrypting everything: emails, PDFs, audio recordings, layer upon layer of digital fortresses. If they breached this, it would mean they'd beaten me at the only game where I had the edge information. Outside, rain tapped against the window pane, each drop a reminder that secrets like water find cracks. I realized I was no longer just defending myself. I was constructing a bulwark against a tidal wave of deceit. Morning arrived with a gray hush. I met Lauren at our childhood diner where jukebox tunes and chipped Formica tables held echoes of simpler days. She slid into the booth wearing a worn plaid shirt, her armor of normalcy, and placed a manila envelope in front of me. Inside were copies of insurance policies Dad had never mentioned: offshore carriers, double indemnity clauses, beneficiaries listed as untraceable. Our grandfather's face watched us from the sepia-toned photo on the wall, as if accusing us of letting his legacy become currency for lies. Lauren's eyes shimmered with silent fury. "They planned for us to vanish," she said softly, "or worse." I nodded, swallowing bile that tasted like betrayal. For a moment, all I felt was the cold slap of true horror. The people who taught me to be loyal to bear suffering had cast us as collateral. We slipped out without breakfast, the waitress's wave left unanswered. Somewhere behind us, our past lay in ruins. Back at my apartment, I pored over those policies. The numbers made my head spin: $750,000 on me, $500,000 on Lauren, channeled through Cayman shells and coded accounts. Dad's neat handwriting on policy notes struck me like a confession, untraceable if overseas. A laugh caught in my throat. His devotion to ledger precision had become the blueprint for our erasure. Every American kid grows up believing their parents love them unconditionally. I had learned instead that love could be calculated like ledger entries measured in premiums and payouts. My phone buzzed a text from Vincent Kruger. Time's running out. My skin crawled. The enforcer wasn't just a threat. He was a clock ticking down my seconds. I realized they'd deployed him to intimidate me, and it had almost worked. But fear had hardened into resolve. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one on their own terms. I drafted a public statement, a concise press release for the local paper, exposing our parents' financial exploits, the trust theft, the shell companies, the insurance scam. It laid bare every twisted deduction they'd made, from pretending a family vacation was professional development to draining Lauren's half of a life-changing trust. I didn't send it yet. Instead, I saved it as a bargaining chip. If they tried to strong-arm us, the world would know. I pictured the headline, "Beloved community pillars exposed as family fraudsters." The thought of them shrinking under that glare felt sweet. But I tempered my triumph. This was nuclear. One wrong move and the blast radius would devastate us too. The watch on my desk gleamed, a symbol of time running out for them and time to strike for us. That afternoon, Vance called. The judge granted an emergency asset freeze on the 3 main shell LLCs and ordered a hearing next week. I leaned back, exhaling tension. I hadn't known I'd held. The fortress was holding for now. But he warned, your parents are capable of desperate acts. They could challenge the freeze or appeal. Be ready. His voice was calm but urgent. I thought of that knock at midnight, of Vincent's blank cards of the insurance dangling over my head like a guillotine. I realized our legal shield wasn't enough. We needed proof of intent, a smoking gun to show they planned to legally vanish us. I scrolled through the night's unearthing and found an email chain from 2 years ago, where Dad and a Costa Rican financial advisor discussed long-term exit strategies. Their plan was to move overseas, liquidate under the radar, and leave us destitute. My stomach turned. Their betrayal had no bottom. I saved the chain as Exhibit Z. The next step had to be surgical. When evening came, I loaded my backpack and headed to the bank's downtown branch. I met quietly with a compliance officer I'd cultivated when challenging the mortgage autopay. Under the hum of fluorescent lights, he handed me printouts of rare internal memos, warnings flagged by bank auditors about suspicious fiduciary misrepresentations. He'd risked his job for this. I felt the weight of his trust. With these memos and the email chain from Costa Rica, we had incontrovertible proof of malicious intent. Leaving the bank, neon city lights bathed my face, half in shadow, half the man I was, half the man I'd become. The watch ticked in my pocket. I knew a storm was coming. Back home, Lauren was waiting with coffee and 2 sheets of legal paper. We signed affidavits, sworn accounts of every interaction, every threat, every midnight knock. Our pens scratched across the lines like sabers unsheathed. When she looked at me, her eyes glistened with tears and triumph. We were no longer victims. We were warriors, protecting our inheritance, not of money, but of dignity. In that moment, I felt an unshakable calm. The watch on the table glowed in the lamplight, its ticking a countdown to our final showdown. We'd given them every chance to come clean. They'd refused. Now they'd face the consequences. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number with one line: he's ready to talk. Midnight, Lakeside Park. My chest tightened. Dad was finally stepping into the light on neutral ground. I felt the old fear bubble up, but this time I recognized it as a sign I was alive, fully committed. I texted Lauren, suit up. We go together. I clipped the Montague watch to my wrist, no longer a gift but a talisman against the darkness they'd chosen. Outside, the rain began again, tapping a staccato rhythm like drums rolling before battle. I closed the door behind me, heart pounding, and stepped into the night toward the confrontation that would either free us or shatter us forever. I pulled into Lakeside Park at exactly midnight. Mist curled above the water like restless ghosts, and the lampposts cast pale halos on the deserted path. My Montague watch reflected in the glass dashboard, its hands frozen at the moment I broke free from autopay. I killed the engine, heart hammering. Lauren's text said she was already there. I stepped onto gravel coat collar, turned up against the chill, and spotted her silhouette by the broken fountain. Ahead, two figures stood under the lone street lamp, Dad's broad shoulders and Mom's bowed frame. They looked smaller here, lost. I swallowed the lump in my throat and took a steadying breath. The lake mirrored our trio, fractured by ripples, a symbol of our broken past and the ties we'd either mend or sever tonight. I joined Lauren at her side, our shoulders almost touching. Dad's voice, low and unsure, carried over the hush. I came because I want to fix this. The single sentence hung in the air, fragile as glass, waiting to shatter or heal. Lauren squared her jaw. Fix what, Dad? The mortgage you let fall into default? The trust money you stole? The policies you wrote with us as beneficiaries in case you decided to disappear? Her words cut through the fog like a blade. I watched Dad close his eyes, pain flickering across his face. He spoke again, voice ragged. I was scared of failing you, failing Mom, failing myself. I thought I could control it all. His confession cracked something inside me. My old anger flickered into pity for the man who'd once been my hero. Yet pity threatened to weaken my resolve. I tightened my grip on the folder in my coat pocket, copies of every email, every forged invoice. If Dad thought remorse might save him, he'd underestimated how far I'd come. I inhaled, letting the cold air sharpen my focus. Remorse doesn't reverse fraud, I said softly. Lauren nodded, and together we faced them. The moment stretched taut. Would this be a summit for repair or an ambush for confession? Mom's lips trembled as she reached for a faded envelope clutched in her hand. The paper crackled when she handed it to me. Inside was a letter from the family's old attorney, Marcus's partner, warning that any further dissemination of private records would prompt criminal charges against me. It bore a single red stamp, final notice. My pulse spiked. They'd tried to bully me one last time. The letter symbolized their world authority used as shield and weapon. I slipped it into my folder. So this was your plan, I said, voice low. Silence us with threats. Dad's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it. In that pregnant pause, I understood he'd let Marcus dictate damage control while he hid behind legalese. A cricket chirped from the reeds, and the echo felt like a countdown. My gaze locked on Dad. You backed yourself into a corner, and now you drag us in with you. The words landed like a verdict, and I felt an electric tremor of power and dread rising in my chest. Dad's shoulders slumped. Under the street lamp, he looked every bit the aging man who spent decades balancing ledgers, but never his own heart. I didn't want to lose the house, he said, voice cracking. I thought if I diverted those funds, I could save us from losing everything. I convinced myself I was protecting you both. His explanation hung between us, an attempt at redemption. But with it came an admission he'd treated our lives as line items. Social status, financial security, respectability, the pillars he worshipped had become idols that blinded him to our humanity. I felt a flicker of empathy, but it collided with the memory of every late-night knock, every phantom threat, and the weight of that foreclosure notice. I realized that, at his core, Dad still believed in the old creed sacrifice and suffering equate to worth. Yet his sacrifice had become self-serving, his suffering feigned. The lake's dark surface swallowed his image as though even nature recoiled from his deceit. I stepped forward. You sacrificed your integrity, I said, and made victims of your children. The words resonated in the hush. Dad closed his eyes, and when he opened them, something irrevocable had shifted in the distance between us. Lightning fractured the sky just a flash, then distant thunder. Rain began to patter soft at first, then more insistent. Lauren glanced at me. We both knew the stakes had shifted from legal to primal. If Dad stayed on his path, he could drag us into chaos. But if he truly broke free, maybe there was a sliver of hope. I held up my phone. I'm recording this. Every word. The glow of the screen illuminated my determined face. Dad's lip trembled. In that moment, I felt the full weight of my choice to expose or to forgive. My hand tightened on the phone as I tapped record. Lauren pulled out her own device. The rain's rhythm quickened like an audience holding its breath. Dad exhaled. The line between man and monster blurred in the dim light. "Go ahead," he whispered. "Record everything." And as the red dot blinked, our confrontation began in earnest. Dad's confession poured out in halting sentences, mingled with apologies that tasted hollow. He admitted each scheme fake charities forged signatures the shell trusts while the rain baptized his words. Each admission was proof of betrayal and also a release for us. The truth was both sword and salve. I watched Lauren's tears blur her vision, yet her grip on her recorder never wavered. The storm around us became a raw soundtrack to this reckoning. When Dad spoke of the insurance policies, his voice cracked at the end. "I thought I was securing your future." That phrase, "securing our future," echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. I pressed further. "At what cost, your conscience?" "Our trust." The words landed like stones, and then just as I felt the confession nearing its climax, headlights swept across the lake's edge. Vincent Kruger emerging from the gloom, silhouette rigid and unreadable. In that moment, the rain froze on my skin. The final act was about to begin, and none of us knew who'd survive it. I pulled my coat tighter against the downpour as Vincent's headlights carved twin beams through the mist, turning the slick pavement into rivers of light. My Montague watch, a gift turned symbol of every unspoken debt, glowed faintly under the street lamp as I stepped forward to meet him. Fear prickled at the back of my neck, but beneath it, I felt something new, a crackling energy that said, I wasn't a desperate son cowering behind spreadsheets anymore. I had crossed a line when I canceled those mortgage payments, and now I was here to own the consequences. The humid air smelled of rain and regret. Behind me, Dad hovered, shoulders bowed under his own guilt, while Lauren stood like a silent sentinel at my side. Vincent opened his trench coat, revealing the bulge of a phone clipped to his belt and a slim leather folder under his arm. "Hand over the transcripts," he said, voice flat. That single demand carried the weight of every threat I'd received, but I squared my shoulders. If they thought they could intimidate me into silence, they'd never met the real me. Instead of backing down, I folded my arms. The broken fountain behind us gurgled in the darkness, its fractured basin a mirror to our shattered family. I met Vincent's gaze, heart-pounding, and said, "You're out of time." As he took a step closer, I realized this showdown would define us all. What would he do next? Vincent's cigarette ended in a glowing ember that he crushed under his heel. Sparks flaring like angry stars. He held up the leather folder. "I've got everything you care about," he said, flipping it open to reveal photographs of my apartment's doorbell camera. Grainy but recognizable, me getting coffee, me leaving for work, private moments captured without my consent. "You think you can record me? I can record you." My pulse spiked. This wasn't just posturing. He'd been hired to dig dirt on me, to turn my own tactics against me. Dad's face drained of color as he realized how deep Vincent's instructions went. The social contract Dad preached, hard work leading to quiet respect, lay in ruins here. All our money had never bought respect. It had only bought leverage for people willing to use it. I looked away at the swirling reflections in the pool, the water's eddies spelling out the lies we'd grown up believing. Success meant money, love meant duty, sacrifice meant worth. A thunderclap rattled the lamp overhead, and the cracked glass canopy above us trembled. I reached into my coat pocket, fingers brushing the second phone Lauren gave me, preloaded with encrypted backups. Vincent's gaze flicked toward my hand. Logic twisted. I wouldn't hand over the recording, but I would outmaneuver him. Yet, as I lifted my sleeve to reveal the phone, I wondered how Dad and Lauren would react if everything exploded here tonight. When I slid the encrypted phone onto the hood of Vincent's Dodge, his jaw tightened. "You think you have me cornered?" he asked, backlit by yellow haze. I tapped a few keys, and the device lit up dual audio channels, video files, metadata logs, all triple-backed in the cloud. "Try deleting that," I said, voice low. He grabbed the folder and tossed it into the lake's shallow water. Wet papers fluttered like wounded birds soaking in murky ripples. I could have charged at him, but the risk was too great. Instead, I pressed upload on the phone. Blue progress bars crawled across the screen, each one a declaration that I wouldn't be silenced. For a moment, Vincent looked almost impressed. Then his eyes narrowed. "Your dad's paying me more to shut this down," he said, voice oily with greed. Logic twisted again. He was less mercenary soldier than businessman calculating his cut. He pulled a small stack of cash from his trench coat, bribe money meant for me, and held it out. The rain bounced off the bills like mocking applause. I refused it, stepping back. Social beliefs collapsed. Money didn't buy loyalty, only opportunism. As the upload finished, I pressed share to Vance and Lauren. Vincent's hand shook as he lunged to grab the phone, but Dad stepped between us, hand trembling on Vincent's shoulder. The tug-of-war froze in the downpour. I held my ground, adrenaline roaring. And then Vincent hissed, "You just betrayed your own." Dad recoiled as though struck. Lauren's eyes glittered with both triumph and uncertainty. I realized that in confronting Vincent, I'd forced Dad into a corner he could neither ignore nor escape. His beliefs that real men suffer in silence, that family loyalty was bought with sacrifice, lay exposed as lies. He looked at me, shame softening his features. I didn't think of the consequences," he stammered. The words sounded small among the thunder, but they were the first honest ones he'd spoken in years. Vincent straightened and pocketed his phone, face settling into a mask of calculating calm. "My job is done," he said, folding his arms. "I'll testify, but only if the family pays me off fully." He eyed Dad, waiting for a nod. Instead, Dad shook his head bowed. The act was symbolic. Dad had chosen truth over old loyalties, or so I hoped. For the first time, I saw my father not as an unbreakable figure of authority, but as a flawed man facing the storm of his own making. The fountain's broken stones glistened under the street lamp, each chip a marker of promises shattered. The rain washed over us, cold mercy. I met Vincent's glare, voice steady. "You'll testify exactly as the recording says, or we'll unleash the press release at dawn." He bit his lip, weighing the offer. In the hush, I realized how hard it was to strip power from someone who'd made a living off secrets. Yet as Vincent finally nodded, I felt the tremor of victory and a deeper unease about what came next. Dawn found me in Vance's office again, the Montague watch ticking on the dark wood desk, as if counting down the final hours. Vance filed the supplemental motion to admit Vincent's testimony, each legal phrase a hammer stroke shaping our fortress of facts. We reviewed every transcript, every ripple in the lake's reflection captured on video. The risk was immense. If Vincent lied or disappeared, our case collapsed. But if he held firm, the asset freeze would become permanent, the shell companies would be dismantled, and our parents would face the full weight of their actions. Vance leaned back, fingers tapping the paperwork. "This might be the last nail in their coffin," he said, eyes sharp. I traced a finger around the watch's polished bezel, thinking of how time had been both my jailer and liberator. We'd believed in inherited duty, that success was chained to tradition, but here we were rewriting the rules. The office window framed a city waking commuters in tailored suits, a street preacher's echo drifting up the hum of possibility. I felt newfound clarity. This wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about rebuilding trust in a world quantified by spreadsheets and contracts. As Vance signed off on the final page, I realized the real battle had never been against my parents, but against the fear that had kept me silent. The papers lay before me, each signature a testament to our new belief that truth once unshackled can't be repaid or erased. Yet even as I sealed the envelope for the court clerk, a tremor of doubt passed through me. How would my parents react when they realized their last refuge had been undermined? Later that evening, I returned to the empty house I'd abandoned weeks ago. The hallway felt cavernous, shadows stretched like ghosts of memory across the hardwood floors. I paused in front of the old family portrait, Dad's stern face, Mom's gentle smile, Lauren and me as kids with our arms slung around each other. The frame was slightly tilted, a small imperfection I never bothered to fix until now. I straightened it. The picture symbolized everything we once believed, that family bound us, that suffering forged character, that success came through sacrifice. I pictured Dad's confession by the fountain, Mom's tears, Vincent's smirk. The house looked smaller now, its walls unable to contain the truth we'd released. I walked to the study where Dad kept his ledgers. The shelves stood bare, the books gone. I flicked on the light and saw on the desk a single legal envelope, a letter from the bank confirming the offshore accounts were empty and the final foreclosure sale scheduled for next week. My breath caught. They'd fled, disappeared into thin air with every dollar they could grab. The betrayal cut deeper than any stolen trust. Outside cicadas hummed in the dying light, indifferent to our tragedy. I felt raw, exposed, wondering if I could ever fill the void they left behind. On the desk, the Montague watch, once a gift, then a weapon, then a talisman, rested beside the envelope. I slid my finger across its cool face, asking myself if cutting them loose meant losing a part of myself too. And as the horizon darkened, I realized the real test lay ahead. Could I rebuild not just my fortune, but my faith in family and in the ideals I'd fought so hard to reclaim? I opened the letter from Mom this morning. It was typed, each line carefully spaced as if rehearsed. She asked for forgiveness, insisted they'd only taken what they needed, begged for a chance to make things right. My finger hovered over the delete button. I remembered standing in the rain with Vincent's phone hot in my hand. I remembered Lauren's tears. I remembered every spreadsheet and every threat. The screen blinked, the cursor pulsed. Part of me wanted to see if her words rang true, if that final olive branch held a genuine bud. Another part of me knew better words could drown me again in excuses. I thought of our grandfather's trust, now restructured under proper management, of the hospital halls where Lauren found her purpose, of the empty lakeside fountain waiting for restoration. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of every choice I'd made. The risks, the twists, the moments I'd stepped into the unknown. Then I tapped archive, letting the letter slip into the digital ether. On my wrist, the Montague watch ticked on a reminder that time moves forward whether we heal or harden. Outside my window, a single crow called, and I wondered if its cry was a farewell or a herald of what comes next. I woke to the familiar chime of my alarm, 6:03 a.m. But something inside me felt untethered. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the muted city noises drifting through the curtains. On the coffee table, the Montague watch lay next to my laptop, its polished face catching the first rays of morning light like a challenge. Time moves on. Consequences linger. I poured black coffee into my favorite ceramic mug. No cracks, no chips. A gift from Lauren after we won the legal battle, and inhaled its acrid warmth. My phone lay face down. I resisted the urge to flip it over to scan the news feeds or check for missed messages. Instead, I watched the steam curl upward, imagining it carrying away the weight of every ledger entry, every late-night confrontation. I thought about Mom's letter, archived and unread words of apology that felt like cobwebs in an empty room. I thought about Dad's hollow eyes under that lone street lamp at Lakeside Park, the rain washing his confession into the ground. Guilt surfaced for a moment, as fleeting as ripples on water, then ebbed away, replaced by a strange clarity. I didn't need their forgiveness. I needed to rebuild my own moral ledger, debit the lies, credit the truth, and balance the books of my conscience. My phone buzzed suddenly, cutting through the morning hush, and the screen name froze my blood. I left the apartment 30 minutes later, the air already warm and damp. At the new trust office, a sleek glass building with jade green accents, I met Lauren in the lobby, her nurse's badge clipped to a tailored blazer. We carried identical manila folders, each heavy with documents. The final trust restructuring papers, the court's judgment, freezing the shell companies, and a letter from the banking regulator confirming the offshore accounts were empty. We slid the folders across the marble counter to a crisp-suited officer who treated our victory like business as usual. Watching him stamp each page felt surreal, as if our family's destruction had become just another transaction. Outside, magnolia blossoms drifted along the sidewalk, white petals against the dark concrete symbols of renewal, struggling to thrive amid the city's grind. Lauren and I walked to a nearby cafe, talking quietly about where to put the reclaimed funds, how to honor Grandpa's original intent without becoming like the parents we'd condemned. She suggested a scholarship fund. I thought about a tech incubator for underrepresented communities. We laughed, we argued, we sketched plans on napkins stained with espresso. On my way out, I passed a mural of a broken column being propped up by human hands. I realized then that rebuilding wasn't just about money, it was about restoring what vulnerability and trust could withstand. Back at my apartment, Vance called with an unexpected update. An account tied to Heritage Future Planning LLC still held a balance about $92,000. It hadn't shown up in the initial freeze because it was registered under a different beneficiary structure. Lauren leaned over my shoulder as I scrolled through the transactions. Childcare stipends, microloans to startups, even a few stray donations to a battered women's shelter in Phoenix. Dad and Mom hadn't emptied that fund. They'd actually used some of it for philanthropy, twisted secretive philanthropy, but philanthropy nonetheless. The logic looped in my mind: the same people who stole from us had also given. Social beliefs collided, wealth hoarded felt dirty. but wealth shared felt redemptive. I felt a strange flutter-pity confusion, a cautious flicker of hope. What if our parents had buried a part of Grandpa's true legacy inside that account? I called Vance back and told him to amend the motion. We'd freeze the account, but earmark its social purpose funds to a board. We'd form half community leaders, half family appointees, so the money served the common good. In that decision, I felt my inner compass pivot. Justice didn't demand obliteration. It demanded accountability and restitution. But who would argue that our parents owed those kids more than they owed us? Later that afternoon, Lauren and I met at that same quiet diner from Part 3, the one with the jukebox and Formica tables. We spread out new paperwork, nonprofit incorporation forms, bylaw drafts, letters of intent from community partners. The diner's retro neon glow bathed our faces in pink, a surreal backdrop to our plans. Around us, nurses, office workers, and retirees chatted about ordinary worries, health insurance, car repairs, weekend barbecues. They didn't know they sat beside the architects of a high-stakes moral reckoning. I remember Dad's words under the street lamp, "I thought I was protecting you," and now saw that protection distorted by pride and fear. We drafted a mission statement: empower future leaders through ethical tech and educational grants. We decided to name the fund in Grandpa's honor, striking out Hayes Family and replacing it with Hayes Legacy Foundation. Symbolism smoothed into action, a fractured name made whole again through service. We met at the banks of Lakeside Park that evening to deliver our plan, the very spot where so much darkness had been confessed. As we handed our proposal to the community liaison, I sensed the broken fountain stirring in the background, an unspoken promise that water might yet flow freely. That night I returned to the house Dad and Mom had abandoned, echoing with hollow memories, and staged a small ceremony of sorts. I placed the Montague watch on the windowsill, letting moonlight gild its face. It bore witness to every chapter: the gift, the insult, the weaponization, the reckoning, and now the restoration. I opened my notebook, lined my pen, poised, and wrote a letter to my future self. Remember where you came from, what you learned, and what you owe the world. I sketched the fountain's broken basin and the arc of water we plan to restore. Outside, a single crow alighted on the lawn, its black feathers ruffling in the night breeze. In folklore, crows are harbingers, embodiments of transformation, death and renewal in one sleek form. I felt the weight of that duality, the shadow of my parents' betrayal alongside the brightness of our new mission. The crow cawed once before taking flight, dissolving into the night. I watched it vanish, heart-pounding, and wondered which part of me would emerge strongest. Weeks passed, and the Hayes Legacy Foundation held its first board meeting in a sunlit conference room overlooking the city skyline. Community leaders, former teachers, nonprofit directors, and Lauren and I sat around a polished table. We voted to fund 3 microgrants, a coding boot camp for single mothers, a literacy project in underfunded schools, and a mental health initiative for college students facing imposter syndrome. I watched the faces around me, eager, hopeful, unburdened by family drama, and felt a surge of purpose deeper than any revenge could kindle. After the meeting, Lauren and I walked back to Lakeside Park. The fountain, repaired and flowing at last, danced in the afternoon sun, droplets catching rainbows. Children played nearby, chasing the mist. An elderly couple fed ducks beside the water's edge. I closed my eyes and felt the spray on my skin, cool, cleansing, alive. The cracked basin had been mended, its scars still visible, but rendered beautiful by the water's arc. It struck me that this was the truest symbol of our journey, hands rebuilding the broken trust flowing where it had stagnated. And yet, as I stood beside Lauren hand in hand, I sensed a subtle tremor in the ground beneath us, a reminder that beneath every calm surface, currents still run deep. This morning I found a voicemail from an unknown number. I listened as a voice, low and familiar, spoke words I never expected. "I'm sorry. I'm free now. I need to tell you something important." My heart seized Dad's voice, haunted but resolute, carrying a promise of another confession. I stared at the flowing fountain, its waters oblivious to the unseen depths. In that moment, I realized the story wasn't over. Even as we wove a new legacy, the old one still whispered beneath the surface, waiting for its next reckoning. I saved the voicemail and called Lauren. "We need to talk." The fountain gurgled behind me, an endless loop of endings and beginnings. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, closed my eyes, and asked myself, when the betrayed become the builders, what happens when the builders confront their makers once more? Story 2. My name's Ethan Mercer. I'm 36 years old, an urban planner by trade, and apparently in my family's eyes, just the guy who shows up for appearances. That's what I'd become, a polite presence in the background, a convenient prop for group photos when they needed to project family unity. Honestly, I hadn't planned to attend my father's retirement party at all. I'd already put miles, both literal and emotional, between me and the circus my family had become. But then came the text from my mother, a long, winding message saturated with guilt. "Ethan, your dad worked his entire life for this. Please, just show up. For the family. For appearances, if nothing else." So I caved. I slipped on the navy suit they always said made me look more respectable, bought a bottle of Dad's favorite single malt scotch, and prepared myself to endure an evening of small talk and passive-aggressive remarks. But even I didn't expect what would happen next. The venue was extravagant. My sister Bianca had picked it out, a gleaming glass-walled hall on the cliffs overlooking the bay. It was pure Bianca dramatic, curated, designed to impress and intimidate. She was always the golden child, the one who entered rooms while the rest of us just walked into them. Tonight was no different. She floated through the crowd in a silver dress that caught the light, just so accepting compliments with that effortless smile she'd perfected since childhood. It had been her idea to throw a joint retirement celebration for both our parents, a symbolic handoff she'd said in the family group chat. At the time, I'd thought that was thoughtful. Now seeing the flawless calligraphy on the menus and the perfectly posed photographers snapping candids of her, I realized it was a stage and she was the star. I spent most of the evening near the back swirling a glass of Pinot Noir, catching up with my cousin Leo, the only one in the family who spoke to me without a hidden agenda. We exchanged sarcastic observations about the ridiculous four-tiered cake shaped like a yacht and the over-enthusiastic string quartet performing Coldplay covers. Then it happened. Bianca tapped her champagne glass with a silver spoon, her signature move for commanding attention. I knew that look. Chin lifted slightly, eyes sweeping the room to ensure everyone's gaze was fixed firmly on her. "I have a small announcement," she said, smiling in a way that pretended to be humble but wasn't. The room fell silent. Even my mother put her hand to her chest as though royalty was about to speak. Bianca continued. "As we celebrate Dad and Mom stepping into this next chapter, we've also made some family decisions. After much discussion, it's been agreed that I'll be inheriting the Bay House to keep it in the family's name, of course. And Ethan," her voice paused, but not long enough for me to react, "will be receiving the family's collection of photo albums and keepsakes." The room erupted in applause. Actual applause. As though she had just announced a donation to charity or solved a global crisis. My parents beamed at her as though she'd just won an award. I didn't clap. I didn't even move. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was that strange sensation of floating outside my own body, watching it all unfold like a bad dream. That house, the Bay House in Fairhaven, I had spent 3 summers of my adult life painstakingly renovating it. I oversaw every upgrade from the custom cedar deck to the hurricane-proof windows, all of which I'd personally paid for when Dad said they couldn't quite swing it. I'd even designed and built the kitchen island myself, a centerpiece made from reclaimed walnut with my initials carved discreetly underneath. Now, without a single conversation, Bianca was receiving it as a gift. And me, I was getting photo albums, souvenirs of a family I had helped prop up, but was never fully included in. I took a breath, placed my wine glass gently on a side table, and spoke loud enough to cut through the polite clapping. "Fair enough," I said, smiling calmly. My smile wasn't bitter or aggressive. It was practiced and polite, the way a server gently reminds a diner that they left their credit card on the table. Bianca faltered, the applause dying down just slightly. This wasn't in the script she had written in her mind. "I'll just reclaim what I paid for," I added. And then I smiled wider, a smile that made a few people look away, unsure if they were witnessing a joke or the start of something far less comfortable. That's nuts. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. No one addressed me directly after that. I noticed a few sidelong glances and whispered exchanges, but no confrontation. My parents didn't approach me, neither did Bianca. When I left early, walking out alone into the sharp evening breeze, I checked my phone and saw that Bianca had already posted a photo to the family group chat, her standing proudly in front of the yacht-shaped cake. The caption read, "Here's to new beginnings." I didn't reply. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, something inside me crystallized. They thought I'd swallow it all again. They assumed I'd quietly absorb the slight, take my place as the loyal, overlooked son, good for appearances, but nothing more. They had no idea who they were dealing with this time. Because this wasn't about the house anymore. It was about respect. It was about history. And it was about to get interesting. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I pulled up in front of the Bay House in Fairhaven. My key still worked. No one had thought to change the locks. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how my family saw me. They didn't think I would actually do anything. They had grown too comfortable with my silence over the years too, used to me quietly swallowing whatever slight they served up, thinking I'd always be the dependable one who smiled, nodded, and moved on. Not this time. I wasn't alone either. I'd brought a crew with me, trusted craftsmen I'd worked with for years on city renovation projects. These guys didn't need instructions. They understood the unspoken rules of precision and efficiency. No drama, no questions, just work. And this wasn't about destruction, it was reclamation. We started with the deck. It was beautiful work, cedar planks, steel cable railing, recessed lighting tucked perfectly along the edges. I'd designed every inch of it to withstand coastal storms, not for Bianca or my parents, but because I believed in building things that lasted. Watching it come apart board by board wasn't sad. It felt necessary, like unthreading a lie. Next were the hurricane-proof windows. I'd chosen those after a storm years ago left the house vulnerable. Paid for them myself when my father hesitated, muttering about tight budgets. I'd registered the warranty in my name, kept the receipts. I owned them not just legally, but morally. The kitchen island followed the one I had built with my own hands over 3 long weekends, sanding every inch of the walnut top until it gleamed. My initials were carved on the underside, almost like I knew even back then that one day I'd need proof it was mine. Every piece we removed was deliberate. I didn't touch what wasn't mine. The cheap patio furniture stayed. The rugs, the paintings, even that tacky brass clock my mother loved, they all stayed. This wasn't revenge, it was respect for boundaries. I was simply enforcing mine. But beneath the mechanics of removal was something deeper, a quiet fury. Yes, but also an old ache rising back up sharper than I'd realized. Each nail I pulled, every board I lifted, felt like peeling back layers of a history I'd tried too hard to rewrite in my mind. For years I'd convinced myself I could make it work, that family meant tolerating their blindness, that showing up even when ignored proved I belonged. That illusion cracked completely as I stood in the hollowed-out living room looking at the empty spaces where my work had once shined. I could almost see my younger self there sanding those floors late at night, imagining my parents would one day sit by the fireplace and tell guests, "Ethan did this for us. He's a good son." What a fool I'd been. Before leaving, I walked to the mantel. I propped up a single envelope against that hideous brass clock. Inside, a simple printed invoice. No anger, no dramatics. Just the facts line by line. Every upgrade, every fixture, every material, every hour logged. Total value $149, $375.82. At the bottom, collected in full. I didn't leave a signature. I didn't need to. By the time I pulled out of the driveway, the Bay House looked gutted. Not ruined, just stripped of the illusion it ever belonged to them. Now it looked exactly like what it was, a structure, not a home. And as the wind blew salt air through the now bare window frames, I felt something loosen in me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped in their narrative. But that freedom wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Because even as I drove back to my apartment, my phone was already buzzing, texts, calls, voice messages. My mother was first. Her voice in the voicemail was confused, almost hurt, as if she couldn't quite compute that her well-trained son had stepped out of line. "Ethan, we're at the house. What's going on? Please call me." No apology, no ownership, just that bewildered tone that always implied I was the one who didn't understand how things worked. Then Bianca chimed in. She didn't call, she sent a photo to the family group chat, the house covered in blue tarps, a sad rental grill standing where my kitchen island used to be. She didn't write a caption, but her silence spoke volumes. Finally, my father's message came, a text this time. 5 words, no punctuation, his style when he was angry. "We need to talk, Ethan." That's when I knew the dynamic had finally shifted. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I wasn't the predictable son who took every slight and smiled through it. But I wasn't finished. See, there was one thing my family didn't know. For the past 2 years, while they praised Bianca's every career milestone and barely registered my accomplishments, I'd been quietly building something of my own 40 miles up the coast. A modest house, thoughtfully designed, quietly constructed with no fanfare. My dream built brick by brick without them knowing. A home I would never need to reclaim because it was mine from the start. And I was going to let them see it, not through words, but through silence and proof. That evening, I posted a single photo on my usually dormant Instagram, a sunset shot of my new home, golden light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. I had chosen myself, a fire pit glowing in front, and a surfboard leaning casually against the porch. No caption, no tags, just that image. I didn't need to explain anything. They would know, especially Bianca, especially my mother. They followed me, they always did, even if they pretended otherwise. As I closed the app and set my phone face down, I felt something almost like relief. They could keep the scraps, the photo albums, the hollow house, their applause. I didn't need any of it. I had built my own place, my own life. But I wasn't quite done with them. Because when my father's text arrived the next morning, short-clipped, "Come to the house Friday 11 a.m. Bring Bianca." I felt something spark deep inside me. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Friday morning arrived crisp and windy, and as I drove down the familiar coastal highway toward the Bay House, I felt calm, but not the kind of calm that comes from peace. This was the quiet of a man who had spent years holding his breath, who was now finally exhaling slow and deliberate. The same battered navy duffel sat on the passenger seat beside me, but this time it wasn't filled with tools or blueprints. This time it held paper, ink, and signatures, the quiet instruments of control. When I pulled into the circular drive, the house looked tired, patched with blue tarps and plywood boards and empty shells stripped of the polish Bianca had once used to impress. My father stood by the door in his old windbreaker hands and pockets posture stiff. Bianca was already there too, leaning against the railing and oversized sunglasses, her phone clutched in one hand like a shield. No smile this time, no grand entrance. Just wariness, like they both sensed that something irreversible was about to unfold. Neither of them spoke as I stepped out of my truck. The wind whipped off the bay salt and cold, carrying that same scent I'd grown up with, nostalgic and biting at once. I let the silence linger, watching them squirm beneath it before finally nodding a greeting. Let's go inside. The interior was worse than I remembered, hollow exposed beams where my kitchen island had been uneven floorboards where the deck had once seamlessly met the house. The wind crept in through plastic sheeting taped hastily over the window frames, rattling the edges like whispers of unfinished business. My father gestured toward the dining table, bare now except for a single dusty fruit bowl. We all sat awkwardly. Dad cleared his throat first, a familiar tick when he wanted to sound in control, but wasn't. Look, Ethan, we don't need to drag this out. We all agree things got out of hand, but you've made your point. The house? I held up a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. No speeches today, Dad. I didn't come for a family summit. I came to finalize things. Bianca stiffened. Finalize what exactly? You've already stripped the house bare. What else is there to take? The edge in her voice was familiar too, but now it felt small, brittle. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, laying it flat on the table between us. This, I said calmly, is a detailed ledger of everything I invested into this property over the past 7 years. Every nail, every window, every piece of timber, every professional invoice, all meticulously documented. My father didn't look surprised, he'd always known. But Bianca's expression shifted from smug defiance to a kind of sharp, cautious curiosity. In this, I continued producing a second slimmer folder as a copy of the lien I filed against this property last week. A mechanic's lien. Perfectly legal. It states that since I provided labor and materials without fair compensation, I hold an equitable claim to the value of those improvements. Bianca scoffed. So you want us to pay you back? Is that what this is about, Ethan? A payday? I met her gaze directly for the first time that morning, letting the silence speak before I answered. No, Bianca. I want something cleaner than that. I want out. Completely. I don't want the house, I don't want the memories, and I certainly don't want another awkward Christmas spent pretending we're a family. I slid a third document across the table, a notarized agreement drafted by a real estate attorney. I sold my lien interest yesterday to a development company. They specialize in distressed coastal properties. My father paled as the weight of my words hit him. Bianca's sunglasses slid down her nose as she processed the implication. You sold your interest, she whispered, almost to herself. I nodded. Not just sold it, sold controlling interest. When the lien was filed, your equity in this house was reduced to less than 50%. That means the developer now holds controlling rights. They intend to redevelop the lot, tear this place down and build something new, something that doesn't have our family name attached to it anymore. The symbolism of that hit harder than any insult ever could. The Bay House wasn't just a property to them, it was a trophy, a monument to their curated image of success. Every dinner party they hosted here, every framed photo on the wall, every meticulously arranged bouquet on the side table had fed that image. Now I was erasing it not with vandalism, but with precision. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind outside rattled the plastic sheets harder now, like it could sense that this house's time was running out. Finally, my father found his voice again, low and strained. You'd destroy this place after everything we put into it, after everything it meant. That was the moment that revealed just how deep his blindness ran. No, Dad, I said, leaning forward slightly. You destroyed this place the moment you treated me like a subcontractor instead of a son. The moment you clapped for Bianca as she handed me photo albums while keeping the house for herself. I'm just finishing what you started. Bianca looked as though she wanted to argue but couldn't quite find the words. She just sat there holding her phone fingers frozen on the screen, like she was deciding whether to take a photo, send a text, or simply disappear into digital denial. I stood up slowly. This is happening whether you accept it or not. The developer will be in touch by Monday to arrange access for their survey team. You're welcome to salvage whatever is left. I won't stop you. I left the folder and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. The cold air hit my face sharp and clean. I turned back just once. I hope this teaches you something, I said softly. About respect, about fairness, about what happens when you assume the quiet one will never stand up. Then I stepped out into the wind, closing the door behind me for what would be the last time. As I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. A message from Leo, my cousin, and ironically, the only one who'd quietly supported me through the years. Just saw your post about your new place. It's beautiful, man. You built something real. I smiled, but I wasn't done yet. There was still one more thing to do, and it would ensure they understood exactly what I'd taken back from them. The following Monday, I sat on the deck of my own coastal retreat 40 miles north, far from Fairhaven, far from their expectations, with a coffee in hand, watching the morning light shimmer across the water. The breeze was steady but gentler here, less harsh than down at the Bay House. The windows of my home caught that light perfectly by design. Every detail of this place reflected intention and care because this was mine. Built not to impress, but to last. And that made all the difference. I had no plans that morning except to breathe. Yet my phone wouldn't let me. The texts kept coming, piling up one after another, desperate and clumsy attempts to reassert a kind of control my family no longer had. Bianca. Please, Ethan, let's talk before you let them destroy everything. My mother. Your father is sick over this. Please reconsider. My father, cryptic as always. You've made your point. Enough. But I wasn't interested in point scoring anymore. This wasn't a tantrum or a petty rebellion. It was clarity. I'd spent a lifetime navigating the unspoken rules of a family obsessed with hierarchy appearances and quiet resentments disguised as tradition. They had drawn the lines long ago, lines that said, I was the quiet one, the dependable one. The one who existed in service to their comfort, and I had stayed within them longer than I should have, until now. By midday, my phone rang again, this time an unknown number. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but instinct told me to answer. Mr. Mr. Mercer, this is Evan from Meridian Development. We completed our preliminary survey this morning. His tone was casual, efficient. I thought you'd want to know your father was at the property early. Tried to block our team from entering. Said there's no way this is legal. Of course he did. Everything's in order, Evan reassured. The lien sale gives us controlling interest. We're moving forward as planned, but I get the sense this isn't going to be smooth. I almost laughed, not bitterly, just with a weary kind of amusement. Nothing with that house was ever smooth, Evan, I said. Just stay professional, follow the law, I'll handle any noise that comes up. And there it was, the final shift. The old Ethan would have driven down there immediately, would have confronted my father face to face in another futile attempt at reason or reconciliation. But that part of me was gone now, burned away in the silence they forced me into for years. Instead, I opened my laptop, calmly typed out an email, not to my parents, not to Bianca, but to my attorney. Short, precise, clear. Please ensure the developer has full legal coverage in case my family attempts to interfere with demolition or sale. I want this transition clean and final. After hitting send, I stood on my deck and looked out over the horizon. This house, the one I'd built quietly while they ignored me, was more than just an escape. It was proof. Proof that I could build something lasting without their validation, without their applause, without their permission. But even then, part of me wrestled with the weight of finality. I wasn't vindictive by nature. I had no desire to see them suffer. And yet, I knew that what I was doing would hurt them, not physically, not even financially. They would survive this loss easily, but in a much deeper way. I was taking away their symbol. The Bay House had always been a metaphor, more than a home. A curated backdrop for family gatherings where appearances mattered more than connection, where they could pretend we were close while keeping me at arm's length. In tearing it down, I was challenging that illusion. And I knew exactly what this would trigger in them. Outrage framed as heartbreak, a scramble to salvage their image in front of extended family. The inevitable narrative they would spin about Ethan, who overreacted. But that no longer mattered. Their approval wasn't the currency I valued anymore. That evening, just as the sun began to sink low, my phone lit up again. Bianca this time, not a text, but a call. I hesitated, then answered, curious to hear what script she'd prepared. Ethan, she said immediately, voice tight but attempting warmth. Look, I think we need to stop this before it goes any further. This doesn't have to end like this. End like what I asked evenly. Her voice faltered just a little. The house. It means something to all of us. To Mom, to Dad. It's where we had birthdays, where you... She hesitated. Where you spent summers fixing it up, remember? That was the crack I'd been waiting for, the casual rewriting of history, the selective nostalgia that erased all the years I was invisible to them. Yeah, I said quietly. I remember exactly who was there and who wasn't. I remember doing all that work while you took pictures for your Instagram and Dad made jokes about how I was finally useful. I remember the applause when you handed me those photo albums like a consolation prize. I remember all of it, Bianca. There was a pause so long I could hear her breath on the other end. Then this isn't you, Ethan. You're not like this. No, I agreed. I wasn't like this, but maybe I should have been. And that was it. I hung up before she could protest or pivot or cry or charm. I wasn't angry, I was simply done. And that done felt stronger than any outburst ever could. The next morning, a local news site carried a small item, historic bayfront property slated for redevelopment. A bland headline, but it caught attention among the same social circles my parents orbited. Within hours, Bianca's friends, Mom's bridge club, Dad's golf buddies, they would all know. The house was coming down. I didn't gloat. I didn't respond to the inevitable barrage of messages. I simply walked out onto my deck, barefoot, coffee in hand, and sat quietly watching the waves break against the shore below. For once, there was nothing left for me to reclaim, nothing left for me to defend. But as the sun rose fully over the water, I realized something else. There was still one more thing to leave behind, a message, not to them, but to myself. That afternoon, I ordered a custom brass plaque. Simple, understated, the kind you see affixed to the side of a building, small enough to go unnoticed by most but permanent for anyone who looks closely. It would read, "This place was built for no one's approval, only peace." When it arrived, I would install it myself, bolted discreetly into the wooden frame of my home. A quiet reminder not of the family I came from, but of the man I had finally chosen to become. And as I sat back, the wind in my hair, I felt a rare kind of freedom, not loud, not dramatic, just steady while I did not mean.